Hello everyone, welcome to Texture Myth. In this session, we are going to talk about another very important terminology related to API, that is API Endpoint and JSON. So these are the two terms that are very important and prerequisite thing that we should know before we start with a practical example. So in today's session, we will be mainly discussing it. What is API Endpoint, what is JSON, and how we can figure out the structure that we will be receiving as a JSON format. But before we proceed further with this session, I would like to recommend you to please go and check out the previously released session first, because they all are in proper sequence and sync. So if you follow it sequentially, then it would be much more easier for you to understand the ongoing topic, because for time being we are just mainly focusing on what is an API endpoint and JSON. But prior to that, we have already discussed many other important things like how API actually works and all the other things. And to make the things easier for you, I have already attached the Texture Myth digital course book in the description box. There you will find more than 3,500 plus sessions available in both Hindi as well as English language. So without any language barrier, you can easily consume the content, and if you have any question or query regarding that, you can directly reach out to me through comment section so that I can help you there. Alright, so let's get started. Here the first very important thing that comes as a question is, what is an API endpoint? So if someone asks you what is API endpoint, so you can simply answer, an endpoint is a specific URL or an API used for an endpoint is the specific URL of an API used to access particular resource. So we know that through API we request something and then we get the resources or response. So in the similar way, whatever URL we are using to get the API resources is considered as an endpoint. Okay, so don't get confused if in the upcoming session if we are referring URL with the endpoint, because endpoint is something from where we are requesting the thing. Okay, then very important thing is each endpoint represent a specific type of data or operation. Yes, so whatever kind of operation we are performing or whatever kind of data we are receiving will represent each endpoint. It will be represented by each endpoint. Okay, so now we have some examples. So you can see /user. /user means get all the users. Similarly, we have /user /1, get a specific user. So if you want to get a specific user, and like what is the difference between first two? In first case we are requesting for all the user, but in case second we are requesting only for a particular user ID, that is 1. So if you want to accept the resources only for the user ID 10, so you can just make it 10. Okay, this is just an example. In the third example, we are fetching the fetching the get product list. Okay, so we are requesting the product list here. So these are the examples that tells us how many types of endpoint could be there. Now these are very important pointers that everyone should know, otherwise they might get confused when we are actually dealing with the API. The very first point says one API can have multiple endpoint. Yes, so when you are working with the APIs, so one API could have multiple endpoint. Second, changing the endpoint change the data you receive. Okay, so when you change something in an endpoint, it will change the response as well, of course, because URL or endpoint is something that is sharing the information like what all kind of data we have or what all operations we are performing. So if you change the endpoint, of course the API response will also get changed. So this is very important line, changing the endpoint changes the data you receive. So sometime in interviews they might ask you directly these questions like, can we have multiple endpoints for one API? So you can say yes, one API can have multiple endpoints. Second thing says changing the endpoint, like the data you receive, like yes, so they might ask you, can like will the data change if I change the API endpoint. So you can say yes, changing the endpoint changes the data you receive. Third point says endpoints are like your different options available in a API. Okay, so whatever option we have in API will be considered as a endpoints. So we have we have one simple analogy for that. So refer the same example we covered in the last session of restaurant, right? So in a restaurant menu we have different items, we have different dishes. Likewise, an API can have multiple different endpoints. Okay, so this line might help you to recall this thing in a very relatable manner. So I think this thing is clear what is API endpoint. Now the next part cover JSON. What is JSON? Okay, so if someone asks you what is JSON, so you can simply say that JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. JavaScript Object Notation. Okay, so it is the main standard format used by the API to send or receive the data. So when you want to send the data from API, when you want to receive the data from API, then in that case we prefer to go with JSON, that is JavaScript Object Notation, and it perform all the operation. Now the question comes why we prefer to go with JSON only. We have other options as well, right? Then why we are referring the JSON? Because JSON is very lightweight. Yes, it is fast to transfer, easy to read and understand. So when you want to understand the JSON format, then it is comparatively very easy as compared to other methods. It is lightweight. Yes, it is very lightweight, and it can be fast in order to transfer it from one thing to another. Okay, also it is used in JavaScript as well. It is easy to use in JavaScript as well as Angular. So when you want to use it, then it is very easy to make to implement in the actual application. Okay, so these are the things. Now the question comes, what is the structure of JSON? Because when we receive the data, it comes in a particular structure, it comes in a particular format. So what is that format? So first line says data is stored in a key value pair. So whatever data you will see in a JSON notation, it will be in a key value pair. Okay, and all the objects that are written will be using the curly braces. So if we have data written inside a curly braces, that means it is object. Likewise, if the data is written inside a square bracket, then we call it as a data written as an array. Okay, so these are the examples you will see. So what will happen, like if we directly start using the things in practical way, then you might get confused. What is this curly braces? What is this square bracket? That is why we are discussing it in a detail. Like in ID, if you want to use object, so you will define it like this: curly braces, ID and 1. That means it is in a key value pair. So we have this ID and we have value. Likewise for name, email. Okay, similarly if you are storing the data in array format, so you will keep like this: square bracket, inside this we have objects, multiple objects. So this kind of combination you might see in the response, like array inside object, or instead of a value we have multiple objects, further objects, right? Nesting is can be possible here with the objects as well as array, nested array, nested object. Okay, so this is fine. Now we have some key points. The first key point says keys are always a string. Yes, so what doesn't matter what kind of keys you are using, it would be only in string format. But if we talk about values, it could be a string, it could be number, boolean, array, or maybe sometime object as well. So keys are always fixed, it is a string, but values can be string, number, boolean, array, or object. Okay, then when Angular fetch all these data, JSON data, it extracts the data and then we use it on a UI. If you want to show it directly as a JSON, that is fine, but otherwise we will extract the meaningful requests. For example, we have ID and name, or maybe you can take this example, ID, name, email. So we will write a logic to extract the ID, name, email from this JSON format, and then we will show it on a UI. Okay, so this is how you will define endpoint and JSON in API. In the next session we will discuss few more things. So thank you for watching TechSharmat.